is Anna Lardinois. I own Gothic Milwaukee, which is haunted historical walking tours of Milwaukee. And I've also written a bunch of books about the spectacular parts of our city. So Milwaukee Ghosts and Legends, Storied and Scandalous Wisconsin, this one that we're going to talk about tonight, which is Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes, and a brand new book for kiddos, which is The Ghostly Tales of Milwaukee. So I love not so much the dark side of history, but maybe the history that we don't necessarily cover in school, but definitely makes for great storytelling. So that's kind of my niche. So how this book kind of came about is I have just always loved shipwrecks. I've just been fascinated by the disaster element. I love water, and I think that our lake is just so amazingly powerful. And once you go out on the water, you're already in peril. And anything that happens after that, well, that just adds to the story. And so ever since I was a kid, I've just been really fascinated about that. I am incredibly old. And so when I was growing up, that song, I was a pretty little kid when The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald came out. And that captivated me forever. And I still love that song. I played on the Shipwrecks tour because I think it's so great. And that's began my real lifelong fascination with this. So I ended up pitching a book about shipwrecks of the Great Lakes a few years ago to a different publisher. And they said, we want to work with you, but not that, because regional books don't sell. And so I was like, okay, and ended up doing something different. And then a few years later, a different publisher said, hey, we are doing a collection of shipwreck books. Do you want to do the one of the Great Lakes? And I was like, oh my gosh, my dreams are coming true. And I didn't even have to do anything. This is so amazing. And I assigned this contract to write these books the very first week of May, or rather of March 2020. And my dream was that I was going to spend a bunch of time in Whitefish in Michigan to be at the Shipwrecks Museum. I was going to write this in haunted lighthouses. I was going to have the wreck experience of my dreams. But I think we all know what happened 1 week later. We got locked down for coronavirus, and all of that did not happen. So I was in a really a predicament. The good people of Wisconsin Marine Historical Society have been wonderful and welcoming and allowed me to use their archives to write this book. However, their archives are housed in Central Library, which, as you know, is still largely on lockdown. And the publisher really did not care that I was experiencing these problems. So, a contract's a contract. So I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And I ended up making some great friends at the Bowling Green School in Ohio. Now, without them and their amazing electronic archives of Great Lakes wrecks and Great Lakes records, I do not know if I would have been able to make my deadline. So that's kind of a little background on how this happened. So I have broken the book into each of the 5 lakes and selected wrecks from each. And I did a mixture of things that everyone would expect to have. Like the Eastland, it would be really hard to write a Great Lakes collection without the Eastland. It's the worst maritime disaster that ever occurred on the Great Lakes. It occurred in our Lake Michigan. It occurred in Chicago. And those 844 people who died, they died before they ever really set sail. They were still at the dock on Clark Street. So people expect that to be in a book. And I, of course, complied with that, but I was even more delighted because in making the arrangements to make this book, I said that I would really like to select stories that have some legend with it, or a haunting, or something that makes it a little bit unusual. I am not a sailor. I'm a sailing enthusiast, but I did not come at this from a technical standpoint. So you're going to get the basics of what kind of ship it was and how big it was, but not really details about the technical things, because that's not my fascination. My fascination is the human story. So the Eastland actually does have a supernatural element. So it doubled for me, because you might know that when they were pulling these bodies out of the river, they were stacking up on the docks, and they needed a place to put them because there was just far too many for that space. And so around the corner, there was an armory, and they made that into a temporary morgue. And they were lining corpses up in rows of 85, just people shoulder to shoulder. And apparently it was not only unrefrigerated, but so incredibly awful, because a lot of these people's faces were frozen in their last struggle. So it was just a really horrible experience to be in there. And it might not surprise you that a lot of people think that that building became haunted. And the building becomes famous less than 100 years later, because it becomes Harpo Studios, the place where they filmed the Oprah Winfrey Show. And people seem to have had a number of haunted experiences there. So it kind of fits both of my criteria: legendary and spooktacular. The Lady Elgin is another one of them. I would think that the Lady Elgin is probably Milwaukee's very favorite shipwreck, because it's such a Milwaukee-centric story. And there is both a legend, perhaps, if you are inclined to believe those things, the cursing of the Augusta and all of their crew, and some ghostly tales about those who never made it back from the Elgin that night. So not only is it exciting to me because of the spooky parts, but it is considered the second worst maritime disaster that ever occurred on the Great Lakes. We have the G.P. Griffith, which is the third, and it is a really harrowing story. It's not a Wisconsin tale, but we have a tragedy very similar to this one, the Phoenix, where the boat catches on fire and burns to the waterline while it's on open water, and people run into a lot of difficulties. And then finally, it would be difficult, I think, to have a collection like this without including the Edmund Fitzgerald, because it's so incredibly well known. In fact, when I am going around town telling my stories and I talk about maritime disasters, people always say, "Are you going to tell us the Edmund Fitzgerald?" And they're always surprised to find out that as far as a body count goes, it is considerably lower than other the tragedies that had become really famous, because it was a working ship. And most of these truly legendary tragedies are ships that had passengers, and that's really the difference. So tonight I'm going to tell you a few stories that I really like, that you might not be familiar with, that have a bit of the supernatural involved in the wreck. And so I hope that you enjoy that. So we'll start this with two stories about Premonitions Unheeded. And these are the actual images of both of these boats. And if we look at the one that's on the right, that's from Lake Ontario. And this ship that has all of these people lined up here, they are waiting to get on the ship that is also hauling all manner of cargo and livestock. This ship and ships like it were the way that people got it around in those little lakeshore and island communities in northern Lake Ontario. And this story takes place in 1879, and if the star, if you will, is not really the boat. The star of this story is a brand new married wife. She is a newlywed. She is traveling with her doctor husband, and he is not only recently married, but he's recently graduated. And they are going to set up their new home and his new practice in one of these tiny island communities. So it's going to probably be the last sail of the season for this boat. And they've already been stuck for a couple of days in this town. We know how November gales can be on the lakes. The winds are powerful, they're frigid cold, and unpredictable. So a lot of people who are hoping to set sail on this particular boat have been waiting around in town for it to be safe enough for the boat to set sail. And the boat is just filled to the brim with cargo, because this is probably going to be the last sail. So lots of people have things being shipped to them because it has to last for winter. So on day 3, the woman and her husband are eating breakfast in a room with other passengers and crew of the ship. And she says, I had such a vivid dream last night that the ship is going to sink and be lost forever. I think that we should just buy train tickets and get there that way. And her husband's like, honey, no, it's just a dream. Don't worry about it. Besides, all of our stuff is already on the ship and we already have tickets. She is unsure what to do. It's 1879. She doesn't really have a big voice in this union, and she's a brand new newlywed. Can she really start defying her husband at this time? She's unconvinced, and the captain, he overhears this, and he comes and sits at their table and says, I would never sail if it wasn't safe. We are all going to be just fine. That day, the weather still doesn't break, so it's nighttime, and some of the people decide that they're going to sleep in hotels in the town. Some of the people, like the very frugal newlyweds, are sleeping on the boat, and the captain is just pacing because he's waiting for any break in this weather so they can set sail. And at 3 in the morning, he sees the break he's been waiting for, and he decides this is it, we're going to go. He sends a runner into town to try to get these people who have left the boat to come back. And they have this very limited amount of time. Some of the crew is even in town, and they say, that was going to be my last one. I'm not going out. Have a great season. We'll see you in spring. So they bring anyone who wants to come. Everyone's very rushed. They get on this ship and they set sail. And of course, the snow picks up and it's starting to swirl, but the captain's going to press on. He wants this last fare. The lighthouse keeper remembers seeing this burdened ship going through a snowstorm, but still holding her own. And that was the last time anyone had seen this ship. When it didn't come in, people thought, well, it had just found a place to ride out the storm. But then it was gone for too long. And they started sending out boats to look for it, and still no one could find it. Some debris has been found from this ship, but the ship hasn't, and neither have the people aboard. And some people believe if only they had heeded that premonition of that woman, perhaps all of those lives could have been saved. Something to think about, certainly. But that's not the only Great Lakes wreck that involves a premonition. The Western Reserve has something very similar. The Western Reserve, obviously a much more sleek and exciting ship. It was one of the first steel ships to sail on the Great Lakes. And it was owned by a millionaire named Peter Minch. But he wasn't a dilettante. He had grown up on the lakes. His father was a captain. He was a master sailor. And he was fairly in love with this ship and thought that it was sleek and unsinkable. Late summer 1892, he decides that he's going to turn a cargo run on the ship into a pleasure cruise for his family. So, along with the 21 crew members, he, his wife, their two kids, a boy and a girl, the wife's sister, and her little 9-year-old daughter, they all go aboard and they're going to have this great time. And it starts out like a great time. It only takes them 2 days to get from Erie, because they leave at Cleveland, to get to Lake Superior. Well, they're making great time because this massive boat is empty. They're going to pick up some ore. Day 3, they run into a rare summer gale, and it's getting rough on the waters. But Peter Minch, he's a little excited, this master seaman. He wants to see what this ship can do. It's one of the finest ships on the lake, and he knows it. So when the captain's kind of hugging shore to stay safe, he's like, don't do that. This ship is designed for this. Get out into open water. Let's give it a whirl. So the captain does what he's told. The waves are high, the winds are punishing, and this ship that is riding so high in the water is just being tossed and turned. And eventually they hear this tremendous crash. The ship is breaking in half. Everyone's unprepared for that. And every time a wave hits it, it's separating the ship more and more. No one can believe this is happening, but people they keep their head. The sailors put the 2 lifeboats into the water. One has some of the higher ranking crew members and the family. The other has the rest of the crew. And they are all watching from their lifeboats as this massive freighter sinks with its engine still running in less than 10 minutes. So now these 2 little boats are out there in the storm, and they have 60 miles to get to land. It's not going to be easy. And as they're contemplating their next moves, they are hit by a giant wave, and one of the lifeboats capsizes. It's the one that hasn't just crew. So the other rows over to where the boat capsized and is waiting, just looking above the waves to see if they can see any heads pop up. And only 2 pop up. One is the son of the captain, the other is a wheelman. So they pull those 2 men onto the ship, or rather the lifeboat. But now the lifeboat is dangerously overweight because it's not designed for these 2 extra men. And it is sailing low, just inches above the waterline, and waves are everywhere. So they have to bail, continually bail. And there's only 1 bucket on the ship. Fortunately, some of the men's hats were still on, and they were using those as buckets. And they're just endlessly bailing and hoping for some kind of miracle to happen. And then they see it. Red lights in the distance, a freighter. They move as much as they dare without upsetting the ship, the little lifeboat. It does no good. Their yells can't be heard over the roar of the storm. It's nighttime. They have no light on this lifeboat. In a desperate bid, they take the shawl off of one of the women and try to light it on fire with some of their waterproof matches. But that shawl is soaked through, just like everything else on board. They can't do anything. So they just watch it sail on out of sight and continue to bail throughout the night. As dawn comes up, everyone is freezing and exhausted and soaking wet. But hope is still in their hearts because they see land on the horizon. They're thrilled. They continue to bail as they let the tide push them into shore. And it's doing it. It's taking hours, but it's happening. And within 2 miles of shore, this lifeboat that has made it this 58 miles through a tremendous storm and all of that hardship gets hit by a massive wave. And as the lifeboat gets hit, it capsizes. And this time only one person makes it to the surface. That one wheelman who made it the first time. He has a life preserver around him and he clings on tight and lets the tide push him in. He is so exhausted he can barely swim a stroke. He's drifting in and out of consciousness, but he is going to survive. He washes up on the beach and he realizes that his journey is not over because now he has to walk 10 miles to the life station, the life rescue station, or no one's going to know he's there. So he lays on the beach for about an hour just to try to warm up in the sun. And then he begins that 10-mile trek. And sometimes he's crawling on his hands and knees through the forest. But he shows up to the life rescue station. He's bloody, he's battered, he's exhausted, but he's alive. And when the men who are inside of that station open the door, they can't believe it. But there's one man who is even more shocked. And it's a man named Ben Trudell. And when Ben hears the story of how the wheelman got there, he can't believe it. Because the night before, he had a dream that was so vivid about a shipwreck on Lake Superior that it brought him out of his sleep. And it was such an intense dream, he could not go back to sleep. Instead, he got up, he got dressed, and he went to talk to the night watchman. He explained that he had a dream that a freighter was being taken by the waves and that people were in peril. In the dream, a very well-dressed man rises from the waves and points out to the stormy sea. The night watchman says, "Did you have a lot to drink tonight? Like, what's the situation? Like, no one has called in a rescue. Everything is fine. Go back to bed. It's just a dream." Mocked him. He can't shake the feeling though, and even tells some of his colleagues, and they mock him too. And so he eventually goes back to bed, but it's still with him the next morning. And then when he starts hearing the story of this wheelman, he's stunned. It is so much like his dream, he just can't believe it. So he is one of the men who go to the beach and look for survivors. They're, going through the beach that the wheelman washed up on. They find the boat, it's empty, and they find a few bodies that are washed up on shore. And Ben Trudell walks over to the man who's laying on the beach. And he turns his body over. And as he does that, the hand of the corpse falls into his own, mimicking a handshake that he had dreamed about. And when he sees the face of this man, he was no stranger. He dreamt of that man. It's the man from the dream. And then when they look at his engraved wristwatch, it is all confirmed. It was Peter Minch. The legend from there grows. Ben Trudell is forever linked to the Western Reserve because of that incredible dream and how close it was to the real sinking. The Western Reserve remains beneath those icy waves in Lake Superior, and she'll probably never be recovered. But some people swear that when they are by Deer Park, that island where the wheelmen washed up, that they can hear talking, laughing sometimes. And they see sailing out of the fog the Western Reserve. Just briefly glimpse her, and then she sails back into the fog and drifts away. Many people believe the Western Reserve is one of those ghost ships that still sail the lakes. We have another famous ghost ship, not a story I'm going to tell tonight, but you may have heard me tell the story of the Rouse Simmons. Some people called it the Christmas tree boat. That's another ship that is supposedly continues to set sail on the lakes, even though she was lost many years ago. The SS Phoenix, a story that I referenced, and you may have heard me talk about this story, is a really tragic story of a ship that was going up the lakes. And with that was a regular route from New York and then through all of the Great Lakes to get to the Midwest. It's how a lot of our German and Scandinavian relatives got to the Midwest, because it was the easiest way to do it. We didn't have highways and things like that. So this was the best way. The SS Phoenix is leaving in November from New York, and it is largely populated with new to the country immigrants, many of them not speaking English, and they are bound for Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of those places to begin their new lives. So I imagine that they are exhausted but thrilled, because they've just sailed from Europe to New York, and now they get on the Phoenix and they're sailing to their new homes with everything they own. And it was a very rough journey for them, because they're sailing in November. The weather was terrible, as it often is on the lakes. And after about a week of just being pummeled by winds and heavy waves and wave after wave of seasickness, the captain decides that they're just going to take a little break. They're getting close to one of their destinations. So they're going to take a little break in the Appleton area and Three Rivers area. And everyone is feeling much better for this time where they're not rocking. The crew gets off the ship and goes to get wood to feed the boilers. Now, some people say that they also got a little bit of hooch in town. You never know. That rumor remains to this day. Some say it didn't happen. But they come back, and the storm has died, and they decide that they're going to set sail. Some people awake in the middle of the night because there is just some strange sounds coming from the engine room. The ship is moving strangely, and a crowd of men are outside that door saying, "Let us in." It becomes so heated that one crew member actually punches a visitor in the face because he was trying to get in to see what's happening. But it doesn't take long for the problem that the door is hiding to be revealed. There's a terrible fire happening in there. The boilers were burning so hot that they actually started the timbers on fire, and this wooden ship just went up like a torch. Now, some people think that it's because the crew, who might have had a little bit too much merriment in town, didn't properly put water in these boilers. Other people say that is nothing but scandalous gossip. We'll never know. But what we do know is that the water of Lake Michigan is frigid cold. that this ship has hundreds of people on it and 2 lifeboats. And people soon have to decide whether they're going to burn to death or risk hypothermia. And the tragedy unfolds on that night. And from the few survivors, there are harrowing stories. Stories like 2 little sisters who stand on the edge of the boat together, clasp each other's hands, and just plunge into the freezing water to stay forever linked because there was no escape. The people who survived were few, and those people were stunned because they had come to this new country and they have lost everything. Fortunately, the shipwreck happens very close to Sheboygan. The people of Sheboygan rally around these survivors. Unfortunately, the corpses were left at the site of the SS Phoenix burning. A ship goes by them the next morning and they see this basically bobbing graveyard, and they choose not to collect the bodies. And maritime lore says that is not a good thing. Sailors are a superstitious people, and many sailors believe that when they sailed by those bobbing bodies and they did not collect them, that was the beginning of the end of that ship. And eventually that ship does sink. Coincidence? Curse? Up to you to decide. But those bodies need to go somewhere. And a lot of them begin washing up on the shore in Sheboygan. Very soon, a bunch of singed currency starts circulating in town because people are robbing the corpses that appear on shore. They say those people who spent that money, bad luck befell to them. Today, many people think that the yacht club that is by that beach is haunted by some of the spirits of those same people that washed up on shore. And perhaps that park nearby still has people, or spirits of people rather, trying to make it. Hard for us to say, but totally intriguing if you're me. This will be my last story before I take questions. And it's a story of the Ironsides. It's a very Milwaukee story, and that's why I picked it. And I also picked it because it has an intriguing to me haunting. So the Ironsides is a heartbreaking ship. It was owned by a Milwaukee company. And from the top, it looked like the best ship that you could possibly travel on. It had hot and cold running water during a time that many houses didn't. The staterooms had marble and mahogany. It was just so luxurious. But below deck, it was a completely different story. The company that owned the ship felt that wooden boards didn't really need to be replaced so much as they just needed a new coat of paint. And the sailors who worked on her kept warning that the ship needed a new keel, rather a new hull. But the company said, that's good. They even started, when they would unload cargo from their ships, they started doing it kind of in secret so that people wouldn't see how wet the cargo was. There were rumors all around the lake that this particular ship was paying way above the market rate for labor, just because people knew it was unsafe. And some young sailors took the chance thinking, she's got at least 2 or 3 more rides in her. I'll be fine. And I'm cleaning up on this. That is the ship that a man named Henry Valentine, who worked for the company who owned the ship, bought passage for his wife and his son. He was a little toddler, first time on a boat. Mom and dad bought him this little blue sailor suit, all accounts of what he looked like. He looked like a tiny angel, big blue eyes, blonde curly hair. Like he was a little heart stealer. So mom and dad walk him on that boat, and he's exploring and running around. Passengers are cooing over him. And then the captain blows the whistle. It's time to go. And dad gets off the ship. He's not going to go on this voyage. He has to stay in town and work. This is something for his wife and his son. So he sends them off, waving from the dock, knows that he has booked them passage on the nicest passenger ship on the lakes. They're sailing from Milwaukee to Grand Haven. It should be a lovely time. But he has no idea of what's going on below deck. Mother and son have a lovely room. They're probably snuggled up in their luxury suite as they sleep on this trip across. But in the night, there's a storm. And with the storm comes heavy winds and waves, and the ship is starting to twist and roll in the waves. And every time it is forced to twist, that pops the paint that's holding the ship together. So what was seeping soon becomes running water. It soon becomes flooding ship. All the pumps don't have an impact, and they just don't know what else to do. So the captain realizes this is not good, but they keep sailing, and they keep sailing until dawn comes. By that time, water is knee-high in the ship, and the captain lets people know they're going to have to evacuate soon. That morning, the engines are flooded, and then it's over. Without the engines, they need to get off the boat. Now, fortunately, there's lots of lifeboats here, but they're really quite light. And when they're set in these high waves with heavy winds, they can't hold their own. And these lifeboats are capsizing just as soon as they get into the water. So 5 lifeboats are released from the Ironsides. Everyone has enough life vests for them. But only 2 of those ships end up making it to shore. When the storm dies down, they go out to where the Ironsides was sinking in hopes of finding some survivors. They don't. They find this mother, and she's still in her life vest, but they can't find the little boy. And they're reluctant to leave that little one out there. So they look extra hard. They find him buried in some sand and debris. And they pull him out, and they're stunned by his appearance. Because while these other corpses, are showing signs of being in the water for hours and being dead, he doesn't have any of that. He doesn't have a mark on him. He, in fact, looks like he's sleeping. So they place this little one in a coffin with his mother, and they send him back to Milwaukee. He's buried here. And that should be the end of this story. A tragedy, another ship that is sunk on the lakes. Except this story gets a modern connection. Because in the early 2000s, the Coast Guard is having a rally near Grand Haven, which is something that they do on a regular basis. And people sail from all over the lakes to see, icebreakers and all kinds of different ships. And while they're there, one of the larger ships that the Coast Guard is sailing hears distinctly the call of a young boy looking for help. And it's a very foggy day. They can't see anything, so they send out some rescue boats to look, and they can't find anything. But it's the Coast Guard. They didn't imagine this. This is something they genuinely heard, and they can't just let it go. So they're contacting the rescue station. They're starting to contact the pleasure boats that are in the area to see if anyone is in distress. Nothing. They eventually have to give up, but the men who heard this cry just can't let it go. And so they start looking into it, and they discover that when they heard these cries for help, their ship was directly over where the Ironsides went down. And some of them say, well, the only explanation for that is that was that little boy crying out for help. Because what other explanation could there be? So just a little fun, sad and terrible stories, which are all I like to do. And if you like sad and terrible stories, I totally encourage you to follow Gothic Milwaukee, which is what I'm known professionally as. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all under Gothic Milwaukee. And you can sail with me or walk with me and hear me tell terrible tales, because that's what I love. But now what I would love is to know if you have any questions about me and my terrible tales.
Thank you so much. That was extremely interesting. I love the way you tell stories and we just get this really in-depth picture of what happened. And I think that all of us are going to be kind of looking and listening at the local rivers and lakes a little bit differently now.
Because I mean, there's so many stories. Our lakes and rivers are this amazing, beautiful, powerful thing, but they're also incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. I know that's a good takeaway as well, to always just be really safe. And I'm just thankful for the modes of transportation we have now.
Yes,
Like, it's so sad that these tragedies have happened, but I know that it helps people in the future, what you shouldn't do and how things shouldn't be built.
Well, yes, but we think of shipwrecks as like a long ago thing, but there have been people who have died on Lake Michigan already this year. Maritime disasters are an ever-present part of the lakes, so we cannot let our guards down on that. I don't know if this is a commonly known thing, but there have been over 5,000 shipwrecks on the lakes, and over 30,000 sailors have lost their lives. So this is a number that grows every year. Yeah. So we, I guess, for the weirdos like myself, that means that there's always going to be more stories.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
So what kind of questions might you have about these tales?
Yeah, we're gonna wait a minute for anyone who wants to put a question in the Q&A, and then I'm just gonna read out loud a few comments we've gotten. So our first comment, just scrolling up a little bit. Madeline said, my parents and mother, age 4, were scheduled to be on the Eastland. My grandfather worked at Western Electric and the workers were to enjoy this outing. However, my mother was sick and they decided not to make the trip. Thank goodness, because their lives were saved. Very lucky. Wow.
Yes. If you have never seen it, Madeline, the Chicago PBS did this absolutely amazing documentary, and it has family members of the people that were lost, and they have artifacts, and it's absolutely incredible. It'll make you cry.
Thanks for the recommendation. And another comment, DJ says, amazing storyteller. Thank you so much. The best.
Thank you, DJ.
Great feedback. And from CP Smith, thank you for sharing highlights of these civil maritime tragedies. Did you, when you're writing the book, research any of the military vessels that have sunk in the Great Lakes?
Well, not expressly. You probably know, it sounds like you're a maritime enthusiast, CJ, that the Eastland later becomes a military vessel and is used for military training. So that kind of gets in there, but no, most of these are working ships and passenger ships. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head, and I know you're like, ma'am, how do you not know? Because I've written 2 books since this, that's why. Is in Ontario, there is, I think the Speedy is one of the earliest maritime military losses. And so that's in there, but most of them are those passenger situations or the workers who are in this desperate situation that they never planned on. because I just find that so compelling.
I'm going to read a few additional questions. Also from the same person, CP. When trying to change the name of a swim lane, I get an error 1317 during action set text. Oh, maybe.
I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds terrible. And CJ, I am sorry to hear it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if we can answer that question, but I'm going to move on to Yindra said, is it true that a ship with gold from the Confederate States sank in northern Lake Michigan?
Well, that is definitely a legend. You know, I am apt to say, why not? I didn't write about it, but there are a lot of legends. That is definitely one of them. And there are still people today on the hunt for that. And that's a fun hidden treasure Wisconsin story, like a bunch others that we have. And so I love it.
One other question. What were the chances of someone drowning on a Great Lakes ship in the 19th century? Were immigrants really in a lot of danger?
Heck yeah. Oh, people were in total danger because it wasn't until the Titanic which was 1912, that they even mandated how many lifeboats you had to have. So they're just packing people on as many as they can on these ships. They don't have life jackets. They don't have, safety rings. They don't have anything. And ships like the Phoenix had 2 lifeboats. That was it. And there was like 300 people on there, and they only had room for 30 to be saved. So that is tremendous. There's no early warning system if there's a fire to make plans to get out. And then these people didn't speak English, so it takes even longer to figure out what you're supposed to do. It was terrible, but then there's a ship in the book in the 1950s that burns, which we think of as a very modern time, that these people face many of the same challenges. To be on a boat is dangerous business. It's like beautiful and exciting, but you're automatically in peril. Said a lady who says, come visit me on a boat every Thursday night with Milwaukee Boat.
Yes, I'm sure they have lots of protocol in place.
Oh, they definitely do. But I think that there's something so ridiculous about telling shipwreck stories on a ship that I love it. Because is there anything really more arrogant than let's hear about terrible maritime disasters as we sail on this beautiful river?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is really funny. We're getting a lot of questions, which is great. Another question about, in one of the first slides, it references the number of deaths and they decreased with time. In your research, what did you find regarding in the improvements in maritime regulations, or do you think this was just a randomness that they were decreasing over time?
Well, so I did not rank. I gave you the top 3 and then the last one, just legendary ones. So the Edmund Fitzgerald does not have a high count because it did not have passengers. So it was just the workers. It only needed 29 people to run that ship. And the Eastland 844, almost every single one of those are passengers, because I think only 2, if I'm remembering this correct, only 2 crew members died on that ship. So I think that part of it is we don't really do passenger ships on the Great Lakes quite as much as we used to, because there's a lot of different ways to have transportation, and definitely things are safer. But if you read the book, and you'll see things that are happening in the 60s and 70s, which really is not historically long ago, that people are still in these very dire situations.
Okay, the last question we have that's showing now, what books did you write that were listed in the beginning? If you want to just list them, or we can pull the slide
sure. So Milwaukee Ghosts and Legends, which I believe is available at HMI.
Yes.
And Storied and Scandalous Wisconsin, which is a collection of stories from all over the state about bootlegging, prostitution, murder, the good stuff. And this book, the Shipwrecks of the Great Lakes. And then I have 2 kids spooky books that are coming out. And one is a Milwaukee book that I believe is going to be coming to HMI just in time for Halloween.
Yes, we do have a few copies in stock already. So
Yay.
any four of the books, anyone wants to come check them out in person. And then we also have them on our website as well.
And I'm going to come down and sign them. So if you
Yes.
wanted to buy them from HMI and support HMI, and you wanted a little message written in there, and it's write it out. I will write it and I will sign it.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. And then everyone who is in the Zoom, I will be sending just a follow-up email with this information as well, with links to also the boat tour and then Anna's website. And a few people have asked for your email address. Are you okay with people reaching out via email?
Especially if you have a spooktacular story you want to tell me, absolutely. And you can find me on my website, which is Gothic Milwaukee, and then Gothic Milwaukee on all social media. And I answer like Facebook messages, direct messages from Twitter, Instagram. Like, I don't care. Talk to me. I love it.
Awesome. I'm just going to put, your website in the chat, and then also I'll send up a follow-up email to everyone as well.
Great.
With more info, how to get connected. Oh, that looks like the end of our questions. I want to thank Anna again for presenting to us. That was super interesting. And thank you everyone for watching.
I am very grateful to have the opportunity to talk to everyone, and I hope you had a swashbuckling good time. And thank you so much. And thank you for supporting Historic Milwaukee Inc., because without them, we would lose so much curiosity about our city. So it's just a wonderful way. By supporting them, you support the continued love of our community, and I love that too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.